What is technology? Let's ask, what is technology? For many of us, our first instinct is to think about devices, instruments, and machines that optimize our ability to accomplish what we want to accomplish. So just, if you could, just shout out some products, some devices, instruments that fit that definition. Just let's get our minds going. Shout one out. Smartphone, great, easy. How many people have a smartphone in here? Everybody, basically, yeah. Okay, someone else, just shout something out. The cotton gin, okay, we're going old school. All right, that's great. But that is technology. Yeah. Central heating and air is technology. Washing machine, a piece of technology. Air fryer. Wristwatch, yeah. So when we think about technology, when we use that word, we often think about the devices and the products, right? We often think about the things, the cell phone, the clicker in my hand, the wireless pack, the microphone, the screens, the technology that's able to connect us to people who aren't in the room, who are participating. And beginning with humanity's ability to start and harness fire so that they could cook, right? And then keep like violent prey away, right? Starting with that, all the way through self-driving cars and artificial intelligence, the list of the products could go on ad infinitum. And we could just name them. Sorry. Let me go back. When we think about technology, the word, I put a little quote, a little passage here. I want to set sort of some level ground so that we can be on the same page as we get into this conversation today about Jacques Ellul and his thoughts about technology. But the German word technique and the French word technologie, from which we derive our term technology, was originally, not a reference to devices, instruments, or machines, but a reference to how specific desired outcomes are accomplished or realized. Okay? So our immediate thought, this is what I'm trying to do here, our immediate thought when I ask you about technology, most of us, what we're thinking about are the devices, right? Are the products of the technological age or the product of humanity. But technology, in its original Western European definition, is the process by which something is achieved, okay? Technology is the process by which something is achieved. And so in that frame, technology is a particular methodology. Technology is a particular methodology. And the way I'd like to think about technology as methodology is through this definition. I think it's up there. The technological society, and I'm going to talk more about this in the sermon, is a worldview and ethos where human beings are convinced that they have a cultural mandate to exercise and harness their power to systematically reproduce applications of knowledge to efficiently achieve particular ends. All right? So technology is not just about the devices. Technology and the technological society, it's a worldview. It's an ethos. It's a way of understanding the world. It's a way of understanding our humanity, where this cultural mandate emerges to exercise and harness power to systematically reproduce applications of knowledge to efficiently achieve particular ends. And so if we were to pare it down, to parse it down, what we're talking about are these three big ideas: power, efficiency, and practicality or utility, okay? Power, efficiency, practicality, utility. We could also say reproducibility. And so these are the three big ideas of a technological worldview. And it's Ellul who begins to unpack this in the 20th century as he begins to offer a social and theological critique of these particular values. So what we've done in this series, and I've never done this before, so I'm hoping it works, and our tech team has been incredible. But we're going to have some conversation partners that are going to be live with us starting next week, but we also have conversation partners that I've been meeting with virtually over the last couple of months and recording some conversations that our tech team very competently pared down and has prepared them for us. And so my conversation partner today is Reverend Dr. Matt Pryor. He's actually a Church of England pastor, and I discovered him actually through his monograph called Confronting Technology, the Theology of Jacques Ellul, printed by Princeton Theological Seminary's monograph series. And I wanted to say, for my part, I first started reading Ellul in college around themes of mass media and the way that mass media can influence and shape societies. And Ellul has a lot to say, and if you haven't heard my sermon, I'm going to say some things about that in the sermon. But I've always kind of been a devotee of Ellul. I found his theology to be compelling, his writing to be compelling, and I discovered Matt basically just through this book. And so I reached out to him and asked if we could have a conversation together. Matt is, like I said, he's a pastor in the Church of England. He's also a lecturer at St. Mellitus College in London. He has multiple degrees in French and Latin and applied theology. Those are from Cambridge. He's got a PhD from Bristol. He's British, so he speaks with a very thick British accent. So I'm hoping our volume is good enough, and I hope that you can hear everything he said. So we had this Zoom interview a few weeks ago, and I asked him to give a brief introduction of Jacques Ellul for us, being that he is the expert, and this is what he said.
First of all, thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here. Jacques Ellul was a French Christian intellectual who lived for most of the 20th century, from 1912 to 1994. And he made it his kind of life's goal to think theologically, think biblically about the most pressing issues of his day. He was himself a kind of social historian. He trained first in law, and that led him to be particularly fascinated by questions of kind of institutions and the changing patterns of life he saw around him. He was really very curious about the world around him, and then he developed kind of studies of what was going on in terms of technology, in terms of the state, in terms of money. And alongside that, he wrote many books of kind of Christian reflection, biblical commentaries that were kind of in dialogue with his writings about society. So I kind of see him, sometimes I say he's like a kind of French C.S. Lewis in the sense that he's a professional in another discipline other than theology, but he's a very capable theologian, lay theologian, very involved in his local church, in the French Reformed Church, and very involved in practical action as well as kind of reflection and writing.
So just a couple of highlights from that clip. One, I loved his description, never heard it before, as the French C.S. Lewis. I think all of us know C.S. Lewis. And so in the French-speaking world, he has that same import. Somebody who is in a totally different discipline, a philosopher, historian, social critic, who does theology and does Christian reflection. And so that's important to understand. The other thing, too, I think is really important that Dr. Pryor mentioned is that he was a church person. He was active in his Reformed church. Now, remember, we're Reformed, and Reformed theology's biggest confession is God and you're not, right? So the whole idea that he would critique the idols of the age makes a lot of sense out of our tradition. And so with that introduction, I asked him why he was so interested in Ellul. Why would he make this his point of emphasis in his academic career and his studies. And what was compelling about his work? And this is what he said.
I studied French, so I had a kind of interest in writing in French, and I spent some time in the church in France and also the church in West Africa, French-speaking church in West Africa. So I had kind of an interest in ministry in French. And I went to train for a Christian ministry in the west of the UK, in Bristol. And there I discovered, in the days when you went to libraries and you had hard copy books, some dusty texts by Jacques Ellul, not so dusty, some of them because they've been well read, but and a wonderful book of his on the city, called The Meaning of the City, translated as The Meaning of the City in English. And he was just someone who was saying things that I thought were so important that weren't said enough in churches, in terms of really engaging with culture, really thinking biblically and deeply, radically, quite radical in the way he approached both a kind of critique of the things, some kind of dominant powers of our day, but also very centered on Jesus and the uniqueness of Christ, and looking through the lens of biblical stories and seeing them not just about case of kind of looking at the historical context, but actually trying to make them contemporary, kind of almost an existential wrestling with Scripture. And I found that really powerful, and that really affected me, particularly when I was going into Christian ministry, wanting to think, what did I have to say to people around me when I was going to be in practical ministry. He's a great read. He's not that hard to understand in the sense that he writes very accessibly. He's very insightful, but he's also concerned for accessibility and quite punchy and quite polemical at times. So it's a great read as well. And he really influenced me particularly, and that's why I ended up doing some further research on him later on in my ministry.
So as we continued in this conversation, I asked if he could just provide just some salient themes of Ellul's work, and this is where we're going to have a launching pad into, I hope, a conversation, where I asked if he could just, for a lay audience, he knew that we were in this context. If he could just provide some salient themes of Ellul's work, and this is what he said. Thanks, Chase.
Sure, thank you. I'd love to. I think I just said a moment ago about method, and I think I'll begin with that. It sounds a bit dry, but I think the kind of way that he looks at culture and tries to bring Bible and culture into dialogue is really powerful. And it's not just something he does accidentally, it's a method of his. So he writes books that are in dialogue, sociological books and biblical books in dialogue with one another. His book on the city, you can read that alongside his book on book called Theology Society, where he analyzes the systems and structures that are dominating society post-war. It's kind of 60s, but it's actually something you can see in some ways having relevance for today. I'll say more about technology in a minute, but so his method, he said he looked at society like you're looking at an ocean. So he sees on the surface we've got the waves and the things that get reported in the news, and it's interesting, but it's not necessarily very deep. At the very deepest level, you get the kind of philosophy that looks at kind of modernity, post-modernity, and that's a bit kind of too much for us to take on. But what he's really interested in is the things that are a bit under the surface, the kind of structures that kind of sustain culture, like media, like money, the economy, like the government, the state, and like technology and developing technologies. And that's where he kind of focuses his interest on the structures. And that's where he thinks Christians need to focus in terms of making meaningful changes, the way we live. And his idea of technique, I mean, we translated technology, but technique is kind of, it's not just about the devices that we have or the items or the kind of machines we make use of. And I wanted to say at the outset, he's not kind of technophobic. He's not saying, knock the whole thing down, it's no use. He's trying to say that we take for granted in the modern world and the postmodern world, if you like now, that a kind of mindset he calls technique, which is that we're focused all the time on trying to gain more power, more control, more kind of predictive control of the future, greater integration of systems and greater efficiencies all the time. And we are kind of blind to that because it's the culture we've grown up in. We're constantly trying to do those things, and we don't necessarily question why we're trying to do them. And his phrase technique is a kind of way of capturing that. I think he used an English phrase in that book, The Technological Society, from Frederick Taylor, the founder of the kind of production line system, the one best way. Technique is about trying to find always the one best way. And you can see that in terms of our corporate lives, but also in terms of our personal lives. We're always thinking, what's the best thing to do here? I'm afraid of missing out if I don't do this, and I must do this and must do that. So always kind of looking to the next thing, to what will be the best result. And sometimes that's rooted in, it's inevitable, sometimes it's rooted in a kind of anxiety about controlling the future. And he questions whether efficiency is the only or most important aim for us. And he also questions kind of the loss of human responsibility and human agency in that. But sometimes we delegate decisions to technologies, either decisions that we ourselves should be taking for ourselves or decisions that are made for other people. So you can think of examples in the way that we automate certain jobs that maybe should we be doing that? Yes, it's more efficient at one level, but then it leads to serious effects on human employees and their families. So you can think about the way we use systems, algorithmic systems to control, to predict in kind of policing, in credit rating, in employment, in kind of recruitment. So and sometimes they can lead to results that we wouldn't really want, but we kind of give away our agency, give it away to systems. So those are kind of two of the key themes. Is method and technology or technique. But I think the thing that I would like to say a bit more about is theology, in terms of how his theology confronts that, and because he's not a counsel of despair. There's a great deal of hope, I think, in the way he approaches. And part of what he's trying to do is give people some critical distance, give them the chance to be free to make good decisions, rather than saying, let's just kind of throw the whole thing down.
So the summary here, and this is, I'm going to launch you into conversations or solo reflection, depending on what you're comfortable with, and I'll explain more about that in just a second. But if we were to summarize some of what Dr. Pryor has put before us, and sort of build a methodology where we can see how Elul, and I think is very helpful for us today as 21st century Christians, his methodology in which we engage culture, in which we can start to reflect theologically about what we experience existentially in our world, particularly as it pertains to technology. So let me just run through these real quick. Number one is that the Bible should engage culture, right? I mean, that may be an oversimplistic kind of statement, because the Bible's complex and our world is complex. I like what Karl Barth once said, that every Christian should hold the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. And the idea that the Bible should be in dialogue with culture, and culture should be in dialogue. We should allow that space for culture to be in dialogue with the Bible. And so just basically, the Bible is not a playbook for Christians to have holy huddles and to separate themselves from the world. But the Bible is God's word to us at a particular time to a particular people, that now speaks to us by the Spirit, that gives us insight and wisdom and discernment as to how to order our lives and engage the cultures in which we live. The second thing is that culture is built by structures that exist below the surface. And where this comes into play, and you'll hear me if you haven't already in the sermon, talk about, we get really fixated on the products themselves, on the technologies themselves, the phones, the self-driving cars, AI, all these things that we get worked up or we feel defeated by, or we feel that we have some level of competency by. What Elul would say is that there's something operating below the surface, and it's the why questions. Why these products? Why are we producing these as a society? What are the goals that we're trying to attain? And so Elul wants us, and I love the image that Matthew gives us, where we dive deeper below the surface to see what's under the surface that is propping up and holding up all the things that we see vis-a-vis these mechanisms, machines, technological advancements. Number three, the most dominant and powerful structure operating in our world today is technology. And when we say structure, we're talking about the technological society. We're not necessarily talking about the products. We're talking about the society that now has either, and I'm going to address this in the sermon, has made the means or the goals. Elul thought that these were the goals. I think that they're actually the means of attaining power, efficiency, and reproducibility. And that confronts us with some really difficult questions about our humanity. We're really going to get into them next week when we talk about AI and what it means to be human. But these are questions about our humanity, what it means to be a human being if we are judged based on the attainment of power, our efficiency, and reproducibility. Or there's a separate set of goals that we use those three, power, efficiency, and reproducibility, to attain. And Elul saw a lot of problems with that. And I'll share more about that in just a moment. And then finally, the Christians should critique technology's quest for power, efficiency, and practicality. He, in his writing, he believed that these were the goals of society. I don't necessarily, I don't think in those terms anymore as we've aged away 3 generations now from Elul. I think he still has import at this point, but I think that these three, power, efficiency, and practicality or reproducibility, is what we leverage to accomplish our goals. I'm not going to talk about those goals. If you heard the sermon, you know what they are. If you haven't, you'll hear them in just a little bit. All right. So these themes dominate Elul's book called The Technological Society. It's still in print today. And if you're looking for a read that will have you saying, how did he see this? Now, there's some stuff at the end of the book that was very science fiction-y that didn't come to pass, but there are themes and thoughts in this particular book that have continuity with what we're experiencing today in the technological age, in the technological society. Again, we're not talking about devices, instruments, and machines. We're talking about the dominant ideology of our age, and as technology, as methodology. So I just want to go back to this slide, and here's what I'd like you to do. Some people don't like talking to people, that's fine. You can just reflect on this question independent, but I'd love for you to reflect with people you came with or somebody to either side of you. If you want to get up, if you're that kind of person and find a little group, you're welcome to do that. I want you to look at these four as we're thinking about engaging the technological society. Which one of these four is compelling to you and why? So I'd love for you to just just get into a little group to have a conversation. Which one of these four is compelling to you? They may all be compelling, but as we went through them, what one was compelling to you and why is it compelling? Why did it sort of hit you in a different way than maybe some of the others, okay? So if you're worshiping remotely, or participating rather remotely, you can take a pen and paper. If you're with somebody, please enjoy that same conversation. Take about 3 minutes, 4 minutes, okay? What compels you about this methodology? All right, 30 seconds, 30 seconds. All right. This whole series is to help us to think theologically about technology. And so this introductory learning module is to really get us to think about what methodologies we might employ. I'm not saying that you should buy Ellul wholesale. But I do think that his methodologies help us, or his methodology rather helps us start to frame how to have the conversations, like you just did, to begin to think about who we are as human beings in this technological age, what the technological society does to us, and not to be ignorant to that or obtuse to that, but the technological society forms us in particular ways. And as Christians, as followers of Christ, as friends of God, to develop a robust theological life around technology and to put it in its proper place in the society is really, really important. So I want to just go the three big ideas from the book itself, and we touched on some of these with the methodology just a moment ago. But technology is a dominating force in modern society. It has profound influence and shapes communities, individuals, institutions, work life, family life. The technological society is not neutral. It lays a claim. I'm going to say more about that in the sermon. Products are neutral. I used the example of this lectern in the last service. You could use this lectern to hold my notes, or I could throw it at you, right? It depends on the utility of the person who holds it. That's neutral, right? It's neutral. But the technological society is not neutral. It lays claims. It has a stake. It wants to form our imagination and our way of being human in a particular way. This relentless pursuit of power, efficiency, utility to dehumanize society. I've already touched on that as well. But let me just say one brief thing about technological propaganda, and then I have two brief clips of Dr. Pryor that'll kind of take us toward the end of our time together. Ellul, in addition, he wrote a lot of books. In addition to the technological society, he wrote a book called Propaganda. And for most of us in the English-speaking world, when we think about propaganda, I don't know about you, let's just do this little experiment. When you think of the word propaganda, what's one of the first things that pops into your mind? Hitler. Yeah, Hitler. The offices of propaganda in certain regimes and certain governments, right? Propaganda. And so, do you hold propaganda as a positive term or a negative term? Negative, right? It's always negative. It's always negative. Now, propaganda, just like this lectern, can be positive too. You could give, positive propaganda is, I love Luke Sundermeyer, right? I'm gonna message that. I'm gonna keep sharing that with what I do. That's propaganda. It's a narrative. It's a messaging, right? So it can be used positively. So I just want to frame that don't just automatically think that propaganda is a negative thing. Like any tool, it can be used for good or for ill. What Ellul saw, which is quite fascinating, and I wish we had time just to maybe just do a whole thing on propaganda and mass media. He was writing in 1954, and he was so ahead of his time in talking about the power of mass media and technologies to shape the minds of people, right? So propaganda is meant to achieve a certain purpose in shaping the mind or reality of someone. And he basically saw this as a manipulation, as a control that the technological society would use to spread information and disinformation. And what we see written 70 years ago is actually coming to bear in our society today as technological advancements make technological propaganda even more accessible and readily available. I saw something not too long ago where you could, somebody did on the ChatGPT, which I'm going to talk about next week, this Google product of artificial intelligence. They asked when Elon Musk died. And it sent back, it went to the internet, grabbed an article that was a fake article. Elon Musk died in a car crash on March the 18th. Now, it hadn't learned yet that Elon Musk hadn't died in real life. It learns, right? It learns that, oh, he didn't die. He went and grabbed the AI. I said, hey, look, I'm personalizing it. It's another thing. Jerry, get ready. Jerry's one of our conversation partners next week. They went and grabbed the information and brought it back, and it was fake. It was fake. And so we have to be super cognizant of technological propaganda, and as Christians who believe in truth, this is of a paramount concern for us. Let me just do two more clips. I asked Dr. Pryor, why is it that church or preachers or theologians or Christians in general are reluctant to engage this topic? Now, we're defying that, but I've never preached on technology. I've never done a learning series on technology, and we're all here. We're interested. But historically, what has been the gap there? Why have Christians not been as engaged in technological advancements? And this is what he said.
Yeah, I think there are a number of answers. One would be around sometimes from some parts of the church, we're very pragmatic. We see a powerful tool that we can use. So we think, oh, what a wonderful gift for gospel communication. And I've no doubt there are great benefits for gospel communication and for many social goods through advanced technologies. But we just kind of think we're very pragmatic. We take kind of instrumentalist idea that, it's a tool, we know how to use it, we're in control. And actually the reality is that the beginning of wisdom when it comes to technology is it's not a tool. It is a way of seeing the world. It's not neutral. It's not bad. It's not good, but it's not neutral. It has values that will impose themselves upon you. So if you try to use TikTok to communicate the gospel, okay, it's possible, but it will impose very short attention. It will impose a mindset of swiping to the next thing. It will impose kind of a lack of depth. So that's one response. I think another would be, we have kind of tried to say, well, let's not be negative. Maybe from the more mainstream church, let's not be negative. Let's see this as an aspect of our creative capacity given by God. And sometimes people use the language of co-creation, that technology is kind of our co-creation with God. And it sounds good, and there is a grain of truth in that, because ultimately these things would not be possible if God hadn't made the potential there in the matter that we receive, and hadn't made it possible for our minds to comprehend it. But the trouble of co-creation is it kind of baptizes what we do as being, this is we're doing this because God's created us to do this, and it means we don't have a critical response to it. We don't have a discerning response to it. Mm-hmm. And Elul would basically say that if you look at the Bible's early narratives about human development, they're quite discerning. They look at he would say, if you trace the city back in Scripture, he said that Cain, and he interprets that text not in a kind of naive way, but in a very kind of rich way, that Cain is the one who builds a city because he needs to escape, wants to escape. And we see that trajectory in texts like the Babel text, most famously. Yeah. And there's something much more going on then. This is just kind of creation with God. And then so there's a sense that I'd always say there's a potential for counter creation, for undoing what God has made in our own work. And essentially, it's the language of idolatry. We might reach for there that there is a real critique in the Old Testament, and it's carried through, that the things we make can easily become objects of worship in their own right. They can work against what God has given us, and partly because they're controllable, they're visible, they're tangible, in a way that the invisible God is not, and expressly not, because we cannot control God, and the voice of God is not controllable in that sense.
Yeah.
So there's that kind of sense. I think that and perhaps the Lord goes too far with that. I think he goes a little bit too far, but I think there's something great value in saying co-creation is just a bit naive. I think, and that's maybe one reason why we haven't had the courage to stand up and say, actually, is the metaverse form of co-creation, for example?
Right.
Is that something that there's a bit more going on there that really we need to be concerned about? Because the other question there relates to is, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be human? And Lord says something quite interesting about that. He says what it means to be human is to be, it's not so much reason, but it is responsiveness to God. And that is, he's mediated by language and by listening and by speaking. And so there's something about our ability to focus, to concentrate, to listen, to be in meaningful face-to-face relationships with people, which is part of what it means to be human. And anything that breaks that down is potentially harmful for communities and for individuals as well. Mm-hmm. So that's the other thing. But what does it mean to be human?
Chase, could you skip the last video and go to the slide right after the last video? Yeah, that one, perfect. Thank you. I don't have time. This clip that I wanted to show is the final clip. It's 5 minutes long, so mindful of our time here. But the full interview, we're going to have on our website. We're going to have access to all the resources that we've utilized, and so the full interview, if you're interested in it, the 40-minute interview will be on the website through the portal with the sermon series. When I asked Dr. Pryor if he could give us a little bit of sort of encouragement for the everyday Christian who's going through the world, who's living in the technological society, what are some things that that he would encourage us to focus on? And he lifted up two things. The first is to reclaim human dignity. And this is a fundamental theological pericope. It's a theological core for our life together as people of God. That God has created all things, and when it comes to the human species, that we're made in the image of God. And so by that, not by how powerful we are, by how efficient we are, about how we can create systems that are reproducible or products that can be reproduced. We're not just another cog in the technological society's wheel. We have intrinsic value in the world because God says it's so. Last night at the wedding that Katie and I officiated for a couple, I had them ask, and AJ is one of our active members, I had asked each of the folks to reflect on some questions. And one of the things that she said about what she appreciated about what she appreciated about her husband, her now husband, is the way that he saw her and saw her value apart from what she produced, apart from her efficiency. It was a very tender moment because as I was reflecting on that, I could see her tears come down her eyes because we long for, as human beings, to be more than all the things that we are shaped to be by the technological society, that we have value because God says it's so. And the other thing that he offered was, and I thought this was really, really good, is to retrain our attention. He said he has a friend who's giving up his smartphone for 6 months, and then he's going to see if he can get through it and then give it up for another 6 months. What gets our attention in the technological society? What do we spend our time doing? What we spend our time on? And he believes, and of course, he's a pastor, so he would say this, as well as an academic, he's a minister. He says we have to carve out time away from the devices, away from what the technological society is trying to imprint on us, and move toward ancient practices of prayer and contemplation and reading, the scriptures and communal meditation, communal prayer, communal reflections on the scriptures, and move away from how so much of our attention is focused on technology. I know it's ironic that I just said that because I used screens to capture your attention, right? And so in some ways, we can't escape it. We can't escape it. But I don't think, as Dr. Pryor said, that we're trying to escape it. We're trying to live within it. And we're trying to be faithful within it, to reclaim our dignity, the dignity of the other, and to retrain our attention to focus on God and who we are in relationship to God and to one another. So we're just scratching the surface. If you're interested in the sermon and haven't gone, I encourage you to tune into the live stream or head over to the sanctuary now, which is where I'm going to go. Thanks for being here today, and I look forward to seeing you soon.